We gather this morning to commemorate Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. There is so much, so many things, so many lives to remember, more than is humanly possible. In a few minutes, you will watch and learn about, we will bring to our collective memory a story of courage and rescue of a righteous Gentile, a Nazi, who saved the lives of many Jews. But in my home, the home of my survivor father, I was taught that learning lessons from the Shoah, hearing stories of courage, that might be important, but it comes second. Because Yom HaShoah, before all else, is about remembering the brutality of the destruction, a destruction and a cruelty that is beyond all lesson. I want to tell you of one of the great American scholars of Holocaust literature. His name is Lawrence Langer. Lawrence Langer's interest in the Shoah began in 1963 after he received a grant as a young man to teach American literature at a university in Austria. In May of 1964, you can imagine May of 1964 was long before there was anything close to a museum in Poland. There were no March of the Living trips. There were no heritage tours. There was nothing like that. And he decided to drive with an American colleague through Czechoslovakia to Poland. And he spent 2 days at Auschwitz, inspecting the main camp. He asked Soviet soldiers to help him. And he inspected the remains of the killing facilities at Birkenau. In 1965, Lawrence Langer became the first professor in the United States to teach a course on Holocaust literature. The following is from a bio about him. They describe his work. He says, a major theme of Lawrence Langer's work, he was against stressing the role of resistance and rescue in the Shoah. You know that the official name of this day, when it was established in the early 1950s in Israel, was Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura. It is the day of the Shoah, but also the resistance. Lawrence Langer, and he was not alone, said, it's not primarily at all. And he said it should not be about resistance. He thought that that was an attempt to deflect attention from the atrocities of the Holocaust by stressing the more positive role of resistance and rescue in the ordeal of European Jewry. In his writing, he both understands and deplores the need to extract positive meaning from a destructive event like the Holocaust, and argues that the impulse to learn something of value from the Shoah experience may represent nothing more than an unconscious desire to avoid confronting its brutal realities. I believe it is appropriate to learn lessons from the Shoah. But I also believe that that comes second. What comes first is an awareness, a speechlessness, a sense of horror at the pure brutality that was the Shoah. And so I take our first few minutes together this morning to highlight that aspect of Holocaust remembrance. In one of his books, Langer formulated an idea. The way that he shaped it, he called it the idea of choiceless choice, to describe the disintegration of moral reality for camp inmates and the general unprecedented situations of conflict that Jews found themselves in during the Holocaust. Normally, when we talk about rescue and moral courage, we talk about making the right choice over the wrong choice, the courageous choice over a different choice. And he said, the first thing in understanding the Shoah is to actually understand the choiceless choice. Here's a quote from an essay that he wrote. Conventional vocabulary limps through a situation that allows no heroic response, no acceptable gesture of protest, no mode of action to permit any of the participants to retain a core of human dignity. The situation itself forbids it, together with a Nazi law stating, for example, that mothers who refuse to surrender their newborn infants to death must accompany them to the gas chamber. That is a choiceless choice. Give up your baby or go to the gas chamber with your baby. He describes Ella Lingens-Reiner, another Auschwitz survivor, who offered a crude but critical instance of how effectively the optionless anguish of the death camp could alienate dignity from choice. In her barracks, she describes, there was a single limited source of water for both washing and for draining excrement from the latrine. If the women took water for washing, the primitive sewage system would be blocked, creating an intolerably offensive and unhealthy situation. Outside the camp, there could be various options to solve this dilemma. Complain to the landlord, the health department, call a plumber, find a new source of water, or just move. In Auschwitz, those choices were, of course, excluded. Lingens-Reiner lucidly sums up the condition of choiceless choice, where the only alternatives are between two indignities. It's dreadful to be without water, she said. It is impossible to let people take away the water while feces are piling up in the ditches. End quote. At the core, for victims in concentration camps, the Shoah was not about moral or heroic choices at its core. At its core, it was about choiceless choices. This subhuman horror reminds me of a story that I heard from my father, Zichrono Livracha. You might have heard this from me before. I don't remember when I last told it. It's a meaningful story to me, and so I retell it fairly often. My father Zichrono Livracha, was a survivor. He was born in Lodz and was in the Lodz ghetto from its beginning until its end, 1939 through 1944. And then he went to Auschwitz and ultimately was liberated from Dachau. But in the 70s and the 80s, my father returned to Poland many times to work on preserving Jewish cemeteries in Poland. And so he spent a lot of time in a couple of different cities, and he went to shul there, and the functioning shul in Warsaw was the Nozik shul, a shul that remained standing. And he describes that one time when he was there in the Nozik shul, he wrote a memoir. It was recently republished in Hebrew. He describes a tall, odd, mysterious man with a long black beard standing in the shul. After seeing him a few times in the shul, my father struck up a conversation with him and found this person to be, although mysterious, intelligent, thoughtful, and discovered that he was an artist. After their first conversation, my father's acquaintances in Poland told him the story of this man. It turns out that this person was not Jewish, although he came to shul all the time. He was a Polish, actually originally German person. He spoke Polish and German. And the story was that he stood as witness to the killings of Nazi soldiers to Jews in Poland, and saw the way that German soldiers treated women, children, and babies. And he said, if these Germans are what make up the human race, I want no part of it. And in the mid-1940s, he stopped speaking. He said what defines human being is the capacity to speak. And he wanted no part of it. So he painted. And he sold his paintings just on the street and didn't talk. They said, for 20 years. For 20 years, he didn't speak. My father asked, why does he speak now? When did that change? The answer, when he came into a shul and saw the remnant of Jews, this group of people praying, who were untouched by that brutality, who through their indignity had somehow retained real human dignity, he said, "Here I can rejoin the human race." And so before we learn lessons of tzedek, which, as I said, I believe are really also important, before we hear stories of heroism and rescue and courage, I ask us all to stand for a moment of silence, the silence of the mysterious artist with the black beard, the silence that remembers that moment of human history when humans became subhuman, when people created in the image of God descended to the depths of cruelty and viciousness. I ask you all to stand for a moment in remembrance. You may be seated.